Good evening, everyone. Give us a couple minutes as everyone enters the room. Welcome. I hope you're all at home, safe and warm. What a crazy night, and we're so glad that you could all make it. My name is Judy Gilmore, and I'm the director at Opalka Gallery, and joining me tonight is my colleague, Amy Griffin, and also Natasha Holmes, who's actually at the gallery, so I don't know if she's on, but she is waiting there in case people showed up at the gallery. And then, of course, we're being joined by Nathaniel Donnett, so welcome, Nathaniel. We have a lot to get through really quickly before we turn it over to Nathaniel, but we are closed, unfortunately, tonight and tomorrow, but that leaves one day left on Saturday to see this wonderful show, Shifting Gaze, a reconstruction of the Black and Hispanic body in contemporary art. It's from the collection of Dr. Robert Feldman, and he's actually going to be giving his own tour of the collection on Saturday morning at 11 a.m. So if you would like to see the show and you haven't, it's a wonderful time to come. It's going to be a really great tour from Bob, very informal, but it'll be really nice to hear from him about the pieces in the collection and really about his philosophy of collecting and how much he really loves supporting artists and seeing the work. So I really hope you can join us for that. And then we're open until 5 on Saturday, and that is the last chance to see the show. So please do come by. It's a really wonderful show. We are so excited to have Nathaniel here. It was very serendipitous that he was actually in residence over in North Adams, Massachusetts. He's from Houston, Texas, but he is there for a few months, and we thought, oh, while he's here, we've got to have him come over for an in-person lecture. And yet here we are on Zoom. So even though he could have Zoomed from Houston, he's actually in Massachusetts, and we are excited that he's close, but hopefully we will get to see him in person as soon as the weather settles down. But we're glad to have him any way we can have him. And it's worth noting, there was a wonderful article written by local art critic Bill Yeager, and he called out Nathaniel's piece out of all the works in the show as something really worth seeing. So Nathaniel's going to talk a little bit about that piece, but he's also going to talk about the full breadth of his work and practice. So we're in for a treat. The way that this is formatted is please feel free to ask questions during his presentations in the chat, and we will be kind of monitoring those, but we will save questions for the end of his presentation. And then we have a pretty manageable group, so we'll probably just call on folks and ask you to unmute yourself so that you can ask questions directly to Nathaniel. So when we get to that point, if you have a question, feel free to throw it up in the chat. We'll call on you. If you don't want us to call on you, make a note of it. But let us know in the chat if you have a question, and then we'll call on you. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over. No, I'm not going to turn it over. I'm going to read Nathaniel's bio first because it's wonderful, and then I will turn it over. So Nathaniel Donnett was born in Houston, Texas. He received his BA in Fine Arts from Texas Southern University and his MFA from Yale University School of Art. He's a recipient of the 2021 Helen Frankenthaler Scholarship, the 2020 Dean's Critical Practice Research Grant, and the 2020 Art and Social Justice Initiative Grant. He's the founder of Not This, Not That, But This, the cross-cultural interdisciplinary website that focuses on visual, sonic, and literal critiques and opinion pieces. Other awards include a 2017 Houston Arts Alliance Individual Artist Grant, a 2015 Idea Fund Andy Warhol Foundation Grant, and a 2014 Harpo Foundation Grant. His work has been exhibited at the Virginia Museum of Fine Art in Richmond, the Menlo Museum of Art in Orlando, Florida, where Shifting Gaze, the exhibition, originated, the Ulrich Museum in Wichita, Kansas, Project Rowhouses in Houston, Texas, the Virginia Museum of Contemporary Art in Virginia Beach, the American Museum in Washington, D.C., the University Museum in Houston, the Kemper Contemporary Arts Museum in Kansas City, Missouri, the Mattatuck Museum in Waterbury, Connecticut, the Contemporary Arts Museum Houston in Houston, and the New Museum in New York City, among others. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Nathaniel.
All right, got it. Okay, thanks. Thanks, Julie, and thanks, Amy, both for having me. And thanks, everyone, for coming out. I really appreciate it. Just going to get started. Just want to let you know this is a pretty much of an overview of my practice, and So, there may be some back and forth if necessary. Let's see. Okay, can we see that? Hello?
Yeah, we can see it.
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, all right. Everyone looks frozen on the image. I was like, oh man. Okay, all right. So I identify as a cultural practitioner because I think for me and my background, art, the word art is a bit limiting in terms of what I do. Although I do not deny being an artist or working in art, I also like to include these other things that I'm interested in. They may or may not be traditionally considered art. And so what I did was I framed my own practice. I self-identified my practice as dark imaginarians, which is neologism and of combining imagination and experience, and all things in between. I think those things kind of cover what I'm interested in and how I move. And the most important thing for me as a practice is that I am always trying to, through material concepts or whatever, trying to think about art and life and argue that point if I can, and support that point that art is life and those things are not separated. Okay, so with that being said, I guess also just to give you a little background of what I'm interested in, I'm interested in exploring ideas of the interior exterior itself, history, race, Blackness, not only as a social construct, but also theoretically applied. I'm interested in everyday aesthetics and how those things move, and how those things can be found through like liminal space, informal metaphysics, and phenomenology. So those are my interests. And so starting off with this is on your left side is my mom's on the far right, and those are my aunts, and those are my cousins, and I don't exist. And I bring this image on the far right is my grandfather. Now I bring these images up because these people are more vital to my practice than anything else, any kind of formal training. My mother was, like you may hear some people talk about how their family wasn't supportive of them being artists because it doesn't bring in money or wealth or whatever. I didn't have that problem. My mom was very, very supportive. And through that type of support, it really gave me an interest in being curious and taking risks. And my grandfather, on the other hand, he was about his money, but he had a business, and the business was landscaping. And what he did was he would hire us, the guys, my cousins and myself. Like I was working with him like at 10, but he would also hire people from the community, like guys who just got out of prison, ex-veterans. One of his best friends was a veteran. I loved to talk with him when I was a kid. He would always answer questions, or people who were just on bad luck, And through that kind of experience in education, I got a sense of community and understanding the idea of collaboration and working deeper than just the surface level. So with that being said, this is where I grew up. It's called a shotgun house, but this kind of house is a double shotgun house because it's like two. And this also, I didn't realize it at the time, but this also helped me get through the idea of vernacular, the idea of vernacular and vernacular architecture, and that comes through in some of the work, or how approach certain forms. In Houston, there's a thing called Project Rowhouse. Judith just mentioned it, and it was formulated by 7 people, Rick Lowe being one of them, just about being another, some other people that you may have heard. And what they do is basically they have 7 houses that they invite artists to come and transform. But they also have, they do like a social type of practice where they help mothers who need help, and they help them, they give them places to live until they can get back on their feet. So it's like a double kind of action. So I was invited, this is the first time I was invited, it's like 2009. And one of the things I was thinking about is the brain and the mind as a filter, an idea of interior and exterior, inside and outside. I wanted to create something where it wasn't just about my work being the subject, but like groups of people doing something. In that neighborhood, there was a middle school that had a library, was the storage room. They didn't really have books. So I felt like what I could do is create objects that could be exchanged for books. So I invited the community to come in if you wanted. I made these little small sculptures out of resin and fabric. And if you wanted one, you can take one for free, and you just bring a book that inspired you in that time frame in your life. So you look on the left, you see wasn't that many books. It's more kind of designed to like invite, and then you see all the books and stuff on the right. All those books were transferred to that school. This kind of gets into what the piece that's in the show Chipping Games now. Actually, when I was making that piece that I just showed you, I took a break, went to a coffee shop to get some tea, and I heard people, I got a friend, and I guess they were friends. Yeah, they were friends. They wasn't dating, but they were friends. And they were talking in terms that goes back to what the Black community in like the early 20th century called Paperback Test, which is based on light and dark skin, and lighter being better and darker being not better, lighter being closer to the white skin, which has more value. You can also see that in Indian cultures, caste systems, you know. So I also, there's also this couple who are psychologists, and Kenneth and Mamie Clark. They were influential in the Gordon Brown education verdict for students not to be separate but equal, that particular one. And their argument was how that can cause like this kind of inferiority complex. And so they had like they did like a doll test. And so those two things plus that hearing that conversation kind of sparked this idea of test, using the paperback test as a strategy to talk about those things. And I created this test you can see on the left. And then there would be people, students, whenever I insert this installation, they would take the test. And these are like the drawings that you see. So then I thought about how could I create a composition with these paper bags, right? From just being like single and think about collectively. And so that's when I created the composition, this kind of ground for these drawings. And that's what you see at that show. And for those who haven't seen the show, the piece that's in the show is the one on the left, right? And a little bit about that piece. I need to move this out there because I can't see my full screen. Okay, a little bit about that piece is, can you see my cursor? Can y'all see that triangle?
Yeah, we see it. We see it.
Okay, so there's a psychologist. His name is Charles Horton Cooley. He has a theory called looking glass theory, and I was interested in that because it kind of reminds me of W. Du Bois' double consciousness. It's, about how one sees oneself. Like W. Du Bois talks about being Black in America and being an American, also being Black, and like that separation of that singleness in terms of your perception of yourself and how you identify. And then this is a little different. It's basically how you see yourself through how others see you, right? Well, I thought about what if you can't see yourself because you were never the people that you're looking at for some type of perception of what you see don't exist. So I thought about in terms of abstract expressionism, how the women were not like seen, were like pretty much invisible, particularly Black women, like Albany Fendell or Alma Thomas. You didn't hear about those names during those times, you know. And so this reflection is a Barnett Newman's painting piece. And ironically, the title, and I'm going to read the title. The title of the piece is called Vic Herosius Sublime, which I think is Latin and means man heroic sublime. And so I think about what about the sublime and, like, you know, womanhood, you know. So that's kind of what that piece kind of references, along with the other things I told you. But in addition to that, and just in terms of the paper bags, I'm showing you on the left here that a lot of people think these are just a single sheet of paper when, you know, they're actually individual paper bags. And I'm also interested in that because if you look at this coloration, you see the pattern, right? You see it as a pattern. And I don't know if I mentioned, but I'm like sort of like a drummer, and I'm interested in pattern. You'll see like that come up later. You know, I'm interested in this kind of quilting aesthetic as well, which inspired me all the Judean quilting. So you'll see that. Up in the far right, I just kind of wanted to show you the texture of the trash bags. And that silhouette the silhouette of the head is inspired by Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man. What's going on? Okay, wait. Okay, this is my first, what I would call intervention, something that I would create in the studio and leave in the neighborhood, neighborhood friendly. Yeah.
Judy, could you make sure everybody's muted?
Yeah, everyone's muted. Nathaniel, you have a little bit of feedback on your mic.
Oh, really?
Just a little bit, yeah.
It's hard to, yeah. It's
Maybe
hard
I'm
to
too loud.
understand with the feedback.
Okay, what about now? Is that better?
No.
No.
All right,
No.
let me try putting on some earphones. So I had a talk
We've been
earlier.
able to understand you, but it is like a kind of a buzzing.
Okay, hold on.
Sure, take your time.
All right, what about now?
Yes, much better.
That is so weird. I had a Zoom earlier. These earphones gave the bad feedback,
Oh,
which is
that's
why I didn't use. Wow. Anyway,
no, that's great.
Nathaniel, could you please repeat the discussion, because that's my piece and I really only caught a small portion of it because of the buzzing.
okay. Is this Dr. Feldman?
Yes, sir.
Hey, how you doing?
Terrific, thank you.
Okay. So what I was saying, starting off with this, so starting off with this, I was working on this in the house, right? I was working on that. And I took a break and I went to the coffee shop and got some tea. I sat next to two friends. They were talking. And what they were talking about is in Black community, they were talking about, this one guy was saying that he can't find dates because he doesn't have good hair. And that's just basically a type of texture of hair that can be considered more value than a different texture. And the young lady was talking about the skin tone. And so these conversations they're not specific to the Black community, and they're in other communities, like I mentioned. They use color, what's called colorism within Indian community as a caste system. They used to anyway. And so that made me think, because I thought this conversation wasn't a conversation that we were still having at the time. So since it is a conversation, I thought once I finished that installation, I could kind of look more into it. And so when I looked more into it, I started, I wouldn't necessarily call it research, I was just curious. And when I looked more into it, I started learning more about Kenneth and Mamie Clark, who are psychologists. They're a couple, and they were important in terms of the Board and Brown education verdict in terms of separate but equal, right? And they use, part of their argument, they use a doll, and they used the doll to show, it was a black doll, and they used the doll to show how people would value the white doll. Well, it was a white and black doll, sorry. They would value the white doll over the black doll, and that was because there was not, because people were separate, they were not able to live, be amongst each other and understand each other's differences, right? So there was like a hierarchy that was created through separation. So we called that the Paperback Test. Mainly that's something that happened in the South. That term was used in the South a lot. And I created this testing thing through installation. And like I had like the test, and you see on the left corner, left right here, this is actual one of the tests that people would take as an installation. And here are 2 drawings. And this is like the grid series of works. So from that, because my work informs itself through going through its own navigation from one thing to the next, we got to this point. And so instead of using the paper bags as a single thing, I use it as a multiple thing to create a ground for the composition. And this particular piece, which is your piece, is inspired by or refers to the absence of women, particularly Black women, in the conversations of abstract expressionism, which was pretty much white male dominant. And the idea that kind of fuels this, or the philosophy or theory that fuels the piece, is the looking glass theory, which is Charles Horton. He's a sociologist, I believe, or a psychologist, or both. Charles Horton Coley. And he came up with this looking glass theory. And the looking glass theory is basically how one sees oneself based on the other person that they're looking at. So it's like a reflection, and how those people view you is how you view yourself. Now that kind of is similar to W.B. Du Bois' double consciousness theory. And that's basically how one sees oneself in a particular place. So when he was talking about is a Black person being an American, like, are you an American and you're Black, you're not seen as a whole, you're seen as something else, or you see yourself that way. The image is a painting by Barnett Newman. And so I always butcher the title, so I had to read it. Vic Herosius Sublimis, and that means man heroic sublime. And so the ironic part about that is that she's looking at, she's defining herself or seeing herself through the lens of a male painter, abstract painter. But there are no other women that's available for her to see herself in. So my question is, how do you see yourself in this particular framework, this theory, when that other thing that you have to see yourself through don't exist? Which is my question with the piece. You got that one? Hello?
Sounded great.
Okay, okay. All right, so I'm moving on.
Yeah, I always thought it was a Richter painting, but thank you. It's a Barnett Newman painting. Thanks.
Barnett Newman zip painting, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I did one that also had a, well, I'm gonna move on. I don't want to dwell on that. Okay, so I talked about this.
But the zips are like the black lines.
Yes, the black and the white lines, yes.
Okay.
So I talked about that. Okay, so I'm also like really interested in behavior, and I also like to associate these things that may not seem to belong together, and try to put them together and see what kind of meaning comes from that, and uncover things that we probably overlook. This particular piece is I wouldn't necessarily call it a performance exactly, but it has performative qualities. But I guess I would consider it an observational piece, and it is what I did was I invited two artists and two art collectors to sleep overnight in this art space called Art League Houston. And what my interest was is trying to access the future. How can you access the future? And that was the question. And my answer was dreams and imagining and speculating. And so the way that I thought you can do that is through sleep. So that's why I invited them to sleep. And then I kind of triggered their dreams. We had pizza. We looked at this sci-fi film dealing with time travel, Danny Darko, and we listened to Sun Ra and Parliament records and stuff. Well, they wasn't records. We listened to the songs, and they took, they slept. Now, I invited Dr. Annette Brissett to come the next day. She's a psychologist, and she used the Carl Jung's theory of not theory, but Carl Jung's questioning by using objects to get people to talk about what they dreamed about. And through this piece, I created like a video collapsing all of the things that happened and what they were saying. I also started thinking more about my practice on dark imaginarians and how that could be more effective in terms of strategy and causing people to think differently or look differently at things and things of that nature. I'm gonna go through this one real quick. I'm pretty interested in the, for this piece's title, it's actually a show, one full piece, but it has many different components. And these different components, I'm trying to get people to look at the idea between life and death. At the time, there was an influx of Black, or at least through media, Black male murders by the police state. And I think that the citizens were not treated as citizens, but I wanted to kind of look at it from a different way, at least in this context, and look at it through the way of what would it be like to be victim to those situations, and think about your last moments. Think about before, the time that you come into and encounter a police officer and the point where you probably be about to die or think you're about to die. Like that particular space I wanted to amplify. And so the room, the images are lit, but the rooms were really, really dark, like really, really dark. Like you couldn't hardly see. And I was implementing the idea of dark adaptation. And that's basically when your eyes start to adapt to the dark and you start to see silhouettes and forms and stuff like that, kind of referencing how through time, Black people have to like always look and try to find situations and answers based off the relationship that, particularly the people that are being killed, based off the relationship with the state and police as citizens. And so I basically, you see a wall here. The wall is a memorial wall. It's drumsticks transformed into batons. The drum here has car speakers, audio speakers on it. And another musician named Marcus Cohn, who lives in Houston. We collaborated and we created this Zen-like Om sound, which is why you see these rocks here as well. The Zen-like Om sound, so to think about meditating and reflection, but then I would hit the bass drum at a certain point to bring you out of that space, because that particular space of rest and meditative activity cannot exist with the kind of tension that's going on socially with this kind of relationship between police and citizens. Now, I also, in the same show, as part of the programming, I created had a Black Southern funeral, and that's me in the casket. And basically, I was trying to get people to think about their own mortality. Another way to put people, or a different mode to put people into the mind state and to imagine and think about what that experience would be like. And just to make it really short, I don't want to go too much in it. It was just basically there were a lot of people who really couldn't even look at me in the casket because it felt so real and it had all of these components of the funeral. I even wrote the script and had an actor, named Maurice, had an actor to act out as a preacher. I had a DJ who was like the choir, and had a dancer who was like a praise dancer. And the script, the premise of the piece is basically I was driving to the museum, and I was stopped by the police, and we got into altercation. The police killed me, and that's what you get. Skip this. This is just a video still, ritual drumming. Skip this one so it won't be all day. But just, yeah, skip this. Okay, so this is all these are old pieces. I'm trying to get to the new ones. This is basically me thinking about how I don't really do text pieces, but I'm thinking about how one can create poetry through like a different way, through some kind of way, through some kind of visual way. And I created the crossword puzzle, and the answers become the poems. And the questions are not visible or not present, but we do see the form and the poem kind of coexisting. And that's how they are presented. So this is Project Rowhouse, is what I spoke about earlier, that installation I talked about earlier, the first piece. This is what it looks on the outside. So I'm thinking about interior and exterior alike. And so what I wanted to do for this one is turn the inside out, right? And so I basically transform the inside to look like how the outside of a row house would look. And my interest in that is because I think that, this thing is about traveling, and this thing about questioning what is home. And the image that we see on the brick wall is an actual row house. And in the neighborhood, it's a lot of gentrification, and there's a lot of abandonment in terms of different houses. And it's a tactic used to prevent people from buying homes unless they have a certain income bracket. And that also pushes people who can't afford to live there based off taxes anymore. That idea of home, which is like being removed from when we think about home. And then there's this philosophy called existential migration, where people are always moving and never finding what home is. And then the idea of homelessness. And so there's an audio piece that goes along with this. And I invited a Nigerian woman and a Black United States American woman to talk about their idea of home and where they live, and also the opposite view. And I wanted to collapse the romantic view of like Black people's romantic view of living in Nigeria or Africa, and Nigerians' romantic view of living in the United States, and bring it more to a realistic place. And so I use those voices And I mixed those voices up to make the sound a little bit illegible, to kind of bring that to that point. I see, I don't think I have, yeah. So that's pretty much it. And so this is also talking about like vernacular architecture and the environment in terms of what I see and how people reuse different materials for their own living space, which is kind of what my practice is about, is using different materials. I'm going to move through this real quickly because I think it's a lot of time going by. Okay, so yes, I'm gonna skip this one. But I'm working with students creating a store as an installation that refers to being other, whatever other means to you. Let me go through that. Okay, and then when I created the silkscreen shirts, and am I the only Black person here? And that was a residency piece. So once I left that residency, I came back to Houston. I was asked to do an ad, and so this is my ad, and this is inspired by Spike Lee's film "Do the Right Thing" and GQ magazines, which is something that I used to look at as a kid. And I'm pretty sure that as a kid, I guess I didn't say this earlier, but I come from a working poverty class in Houston, and there was no such thing as museums and galleries in the world that I lived in, right? I didn't know about those things. So all I did was create and imagine and just do things. And so, but certain things that I did, I can tell informed the way that I work now. And one of those things, I used to look at GQ magazines, fashion magazines a lot. And one of the designers that I liked was Alexander Julian. And so part of my color, my particular color palette comes from that. So, some pieces where I took the heads of the drawings that we had earlier, and I just expanded and pushed that out. So it's no more bodies, it's just abstract pieces with plastic trash bags and other materials. Okay, so these are some of the things that I was doing before that should be 2018, before I went to Yale, and I was interested in the quilting, like I was speaking about earlier, and graphic notation. And so I was using drum patterns to make abstraction. Like, how do you do that? How do you music? How can you see music? How can, my interest is trying to make my practice equivalent on the same level or higher as Black music, and what are the things that Black music has done. And I didn't know it at the time, but I know it now. That Arthur Jaffa is another artist who thinks in that way. So this conscious is a W.B. Du Bois reference. This is a reference to the writer Edward Glisson. He talks about the right to opacity, and there's also Fred Moulton talks about the idea of refusal, the art of refusal, act of refusal. And you see the G. Ben's influence here as well. These pieces are duct tape, ink, found paper. This was found paper and plastic. Another community-based project that I've done is called What's the New News? And what the new news is, I basically created a newspaper for this particular neighborhood that I'm from. Site-specific, neighborhood-specific. And what it's doing is reframing and recreating the narrative that surrounds the neighborhood. So I invite writers and visual artists to participate in this piece with me. And I started in 2010. It's an ongoing project. And the newspaper racks become public artworks. And the newspaper, I asked the writers to not only write whatever the topic, the subject is, but to do it in an experimental way. And in the far right corner, at the left corner, I'm sorry, right here, this is a young lady. She's a scholar, educator at Texas Southern University. She was able to hold a youth workshop where they wrote poems, and their poems were inserted into the newspapers for that particular issue. And it was we gave like a little contest, and they were we had, you know, first, second, third. They got gift what do you call them, gift cards to Barnes and Noble. So it's a full, for me, it's not only studio and it's not only institution, but it's also community, as my practice defined. This is one of the pieces that I did once I was at Yale. It's called Tambourine, and it's basically talking about portals and death, and how, again, how do you see sound, I'm sorry. And there are tambourine jingles inserted into this massive piece that's monumental, right? And I'm looking at this way to move through space and think about how music allows us, or can help us move through space and time, just based on the sound and the songs and our memory. And so I'm trying to do that similar thing with this piece. This piece kind of does the same thing, but it's not quite. Oh, I'm sorry, let me go back here. And you see these records. This is also the idea of refusal, and this is not to be accessed by the public. There's some pieces that I showed you that they don't even, it's not even for you all to see. It's something you have to experience. Okay, this is my expression or thought, thinking about being alone, but in a crowd. And it's, I guess it's for introverts, but as a kid, I'm an only child. And as a kid, I was always around a group of people. Even, you know, even now, I can be around a group of people and just don't feel like I'm connected, you know? And so I'm thinking about that. And this particular song is, this particular title comes from a Sun Ra song. And when people look at the stars and the galaxy, we always think about how everything is beautiful and everything is together, but we never think about the individual star. And we all have a story to tell, and we never know what other people are going through, even if we don't visually see it. Another piece I did at Yale, a public piece, and I also consider this a consideration. One of the things I do in terms of the public spaces, I do things maybe in the studio or not, or I rearrange things and leave them out for people to engage with. And I don't necessarily have to be around to see it. You know, it's just like it's more like a dialogue with people you can't dialogue with other than just doing. So this particular graffiti artist did this piece, and I saw it when I was walking through the neighborhood. And I thought it'd be really interesting to highlight this piece so that it can have balance with this piece. And so I traced it with duct tape, which is one of the materials that I use, so that these things could have equal footing, you know, in terms of visibility, right? Because otherwise you couldn't see it. And so that's one of the ways that I can do that. This is another kind of inspired by the crossword, and figuring out how to create poems in ways, different kind of ways. And so this is like me imagining myself being under surveillance by the FBI while I was at Yale. So I wrote this whole piece as if I was a FBI officer or whatever you call them. And the information that's being redacted, because we all have seen these FBI surveillance for all kinds of activists, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, a bunch of people. And so I thought, how could I create a poem from this kind of looking at the FBI? And so this, see if I can read this poem. So this is the poem. So basically all the words that are in Black is, now, mind you, this is 4-page piece. I left the 3rd page out. So it goes, it's Black artists, Black aesthetics, Blackness, I will not go into detail about the historic timeline unless it's necessary. However, stay. Utilizing all info as he was producing a song with an ensemble of musicians while simultaneously awaiting the moment for a solo. Ideas of incompleteness and the not in between if statement. United States. It grows in questions, recording, diffraction, troublemakers, a poet. Okay, so I'm gonna skip this piece. This is a quote from Miles Davis, and it's basically about nothingness, which is also a conversation that John Paul Sartre, existentialist, talks about, but I'm gonna skip it because time running out. Okay, so this is my idea of creating a constellation, where as I think about cosmology and galaxies and things like that, I like to think about them in a material way. And I like to think about these things like life is always changing. And so the works that I make in this format all fit, the works on paper all fit within the 16 by 20 frame, which is not significant. It just, that's a convenient size. But the piece as an installation also incorporates other types of objects in the works. And I look at this as a living piece. So I continuously make these works, and they are free association works. So the works are relative to whatever I'm going on, whatever I'm thinking about at the time. And the pieces can be in a grid like that. They could be in a straight line. Some of them can be in a different room, but they all are framed in a way that they all work together. Sometimes they have video monitors incorporated into the grid. And this piece on the left here is a book with shoelaces and tambourine jingles. And I'm not going to tell you what the book is about. Another intervention is this is in Houston, and this is on the property of a bunch of buildings, but one of the buildings is called Fresh Arts. And I saw that this particular sculpture didn't have any Black artists, and there's names of artists on the back as well, and on the other side of it. So I put some there myself. So I put Alma Thomas, Romeo Bearden, John Biggers, who's a artist who created who formed the founder of the TSU art department, him and another ceramicist called Carol Sims, John Basquiat, which I spelled wrong, Elizabeth Catlett, and Jack Whitten. Now I feel in some degree, this is a fresh art piece because it's kind of bringing some attention to some very important artists that are not considered. And this is also kind of referring back to graffiti in terms of tagging. Now, I think I'm getting close to the end. So my most current project that I'm wrapping up is called Acknowledgement, the Polyrhythm of Historic Beings. And this particular project is probably the first project that I've done to really fulfill the idea of art is life, and using it as an argument. Although the argument may not be proven, but the way I'm framing it and thinking about it in terms of a thought exercise, it works. So the piece is inspired by the idea of fugitivity. Fred Moulton and Stefan Harney, Undercommons, the book Undercommons, where they talk about Black fugitivity. And Antonio Gramsci talks about language and linguistics. And John Coltrane's Acknowledgement album. And I'm looking at that because I'm thinking about the way that these people are talking. They're talking about fragments. And they're also talking about how one lives, how one moves through or navigates life through fragments to kind of continuously create the whole and be flexible while doing it. So the argument and I'm thinking about it like, how can you argue this point like a mathematical equation? How can you argue this point like a lawyer would argue, or a philosopher would write a debate? And what I came up with was to use all the different components, video, installation, public work, painting, sculpture, the internet, and use all those things interchangeably. And then the final point and the final object that's going to exist is going to be a book with all of the components. How would I do that? And how I'm doing that is I will start from the studio and document the work in the studio and document me making the work. And then using that document and some of those works and placing them out in the public as public art pieces or sculptures or interventions or interruptions. And then doing public art works like this, documenting that and doing the same thing, and just kind of repeating these steps. And then putting some of these things online so that the public can access it. And then, like I said, finalize it in the book. Now, this particular piece is a backpack exchange with students from 3 historical Black neighborhoods. I mentioned one earlier, one I was from, but like my family from the other ones, like 3rd, 4th, and 5th Ward. There's historical Black neighborhoods. And these backpacks, well, I invite the students to come and get new backpacks for their old backpacks. And inside the backpacks, there are some objects from these neighborhoods that I pick up and place in the backpacks for this public work piece. And there are some photographs that are historical photographs from these neighborhoods or about these neighborhoods or people from these neighborhoods and that I place into the bags. The bags that, once the bags are on the wall at 7:30, they will light up and they will blink Morse code. And the Morse code is the chant from John Coltrane's acknowledgement piece, Love Supreme. It'll say Love Supreme over and over. There's also a sentence in James Baldwin, Uses of the Blues. And that is also blinking in Morse code. And then there's a recording artist, singer named Solange. I don't know if you all are familiar with her, but she's from Houston. And she has a song titled Mad. And that first verse talks about carrying baggage and carrying weight. And so that's part of this piece. And then I'm also thinking about how propaganda works and graphic design works and billboards work and also graffiti works in terms of presenting like words, right? And information and transmitting information. So this long text here is a code in a sense, because there are certain words within this long text that only people from those neighborhoods can really find, really know, because they're familiar with it. It's like they can pick it up right away. And that's some Gramsci talks about how languages should be flexible and it should coexist with other languages, right? And so now I'm inspired by the type of text, the way this word is operating from this filmmaker named William Greaves. And he had a film called Symbiotic Psychotaxiplasm. And that word is interesting enough, but the film itself breaks down, has a lot of different fragments and different frames, and it's kind of, it's like a meta film too. It talks about itself. So that kind of idea is what I'm kind of trying to push through this particular piece. Now I'm going to go through these. These are just paintings, but these paintings are textile, and they also influence G's Ben Quilt influence, but they have this own form in terms of its abstraction. But the other thing is like these red lines here, you see, those are shoelaces, and those shoelaces map out my movement through the neighborhood to get these backpacks. So this is how this thing is connected to that thing. And what I was talking about, how life is connected to art, this kind of ways weave together. Same thing for this piece. This is part of that acknowledgement project, but this has the history of enslaved people and laborers. The Imperial Sugar is based off of a city in Houston that's close to Houston, pretty much kind of almost the same, but it's called Sugarland, Texas. And in Sugarland, Texas, you had this family, mainly these three brothers. One ironically named is Nathaniel, their last name was Williams, who came from Galveston and moved and settled in that area. And so they developed this sugarcane plantation. And the sugarcane plantation became, after Reconstruction and everything, and enslaved people were free, it became a prison. In 2018, they found 95 human remains, and they found out that these human remains in this area were either slaves or former forced laborers. Either way it goes, they could be both. But either way it goes, the idea of these bodies and this history being kind of covered in having a lot to do with the wealth building of this company, but you didn't know about it, and then all the lives that were lost to do it was interesting. And I kind of wanted to talk about that because I'm also interested in these things we don't see. Now, the other ironic thing about that, because these brothers came from Galveston, a lot of the freed slaves post-Reconstruction, who the neighborhoods that I talk about, 3rd, 4th, and 5th Ward, they landed in 4th Ward, was the first Black settlement city in Houston called Freemantown. And the holiday of quote unquote freed people is called Juneteenth. And it originated in Galveston, the same place this family came from, which I thought was an interesting kind of tie together. And I'm getting close to the end. So this is another intervention piece that I left in New Haven. And basically it's just this relationship between institutions and communities and who benefits, who doesn't, and how these communities and these institutions engage with each other, what's protected, what's sacred. Now, if you walk by this piece, you won't really think it's anything, you just kind of move on, but then you won't recognize like the beautiful things that are inside, which is the record albums and the records. And also you'll notice that there are the tambourine jingles there, and they operate as kind of like warding off evil spirits and things of that nature. They also operate as like a reflection of constellations as well. Yeah, I'm just gonna kind of go through these and talk about them much, let you look at them. And last thing, we have a special guest. So I'm going to play this video short real quick. But those last images are part of a series called Dark Matter, Dark Energy, where I'm thinking about cosmology and material world and the association between, but I'm not gonna go into it, but I'll play this and just to give you an idea. It's a sound piece, so you might want to turn your sound down a little bit because I don't want it to be too loud, and then you can adjust it as it goes, but it won't be a long time. that's that. You could, if you want to see the rest, you could see it on my website or something. Okay, that's pretty much it.
Thank you, Nathaniel. Can you explain a little bit the sound piece that we just heard, like how you
Yeah.
produced that and who was there?
That's my wife, and I think she's on here, but she looked frozen. Everybody looks frozen, so I don't know if anybody's still here. But the sound piece is feedback, and the she was brushing her hair with the comb. Like I use very like lo-fi kind of thing. I think lo-fi, so I'm not trying to use too much high tech. So I basically put a contact mic on the brush, and it's going through a distortion pedal and a amp, so that it gives the, you know, that kind of distorted sound and that kind of feedback. And again, like I said, I'm interested in music and sound, and I think those are some strategies one could use to expand people's thinking, and also time travel, and reflect. And so that piece has there's a lot of social history that can go with the piece in terms of Black women hair and the politics of hair, but I don't need to get into that. And then there's the other side of thinking about trauma, and how hair can be, I guess growing up and dealing with hair can be traumatizing in a sense. So those are some of the things I'm thinking about. And remember, these things are relate to other works that I've shown. The hanging window screens, which talks about reference Gaston Blanchard's Poetics of Space, and the idea of thinking about the home as a way to access the universe. So there's a lot of, but I didn't want to go into that because I know I spent a lot of time.
No, it's great. And was the piece, was it a performance piece or was it a video? Like how did people view that? Both.
You view it how you want to view it.
Got
That's the imagination part. That's your freedom of choice. But it was not done in front of an audience. I can tell you that. Yeah.
Got it. Well, your practice is incredibly diverse, and I'm glad we got to see all aspects of it. I'm going to open it up to questions. Anyone in the audience, do you guys have questions for Nathaniel? If you don't mind throwing it in the chat or raising your hand. Ada, I see your hand up.
Hi. Could you tell me your website?
Oh, okay. www. I can put it in chat too. NathanielDonnett.com.
Thank you.
Let's see, Livia, there's a question. Would you like to ask?
I can see it.
Oh, great. Is there a particular medium you enjoy working with the most, Nathaniel?
Not really. I enjoy all of them. I think they all are important. I think I may veer towards one or the other based off of what I'm working with or what the point of the piece is about. But if you, that's my answer. I like working with all of them. Nothing, no medium in particular. I think if I don't want to call people a medium, but I probably prefer working with people more than anything. But I don't want to call people a medium. But yeah, they're pretty much all on equal ground. It's just when, where, and how.
That's great. And related, your work is so rooted in theory and criticism and philosophy and music, and do you start there and then get the ideas from that? Is that the inspiration for you, or do you start with an idea and then you find that theories kind of match to that? Like where do you really start?
Yeah, it kind of worked both ways. It's kind of because my whole idea of Dark Imaginarians is is a theory unto itself, you know, and finding other people who write about these things that I may not be familiar with is interesting. So it does go in that direction. But then when you finding other things, you find other things, and then it comes back in the opposite direction. So I don't want to sound like I'm playing word games, but it's kind of, I'm just open to it all, you know, and I'm curious about it. And some of the things, and I don't want it to sound like I'm only theoretical, because that's not the case. I just like thinking about stuff, and I like to do and think with other people, you know, and that's one way to do it. Art is one way to do it. And I didn't mention it earlier. It's not really answering your question, but I'm just want to say it. I didn't mention earlier, but like a lot of what I'm interested in when I have my own solo shows is inviting people who are a lot smarter than I am to talk about those subjects that I'm interested in, to give it more context and more meaning, which is why I say I like working with people, because that allows me to develop myself. You know, I learn more too. So it's a cycle of things, you know.
That's great. Charlotte, you had a question. Do you mind asking on camera? Nope, I can ask it. Okay, so how do you feel about sharing the meanings behind your pieces? Does it feel uncomfortable? Do you wish that you could explain more?
No, I think I explained too much. And I give too much away, but I didn't give you all the juice, because there's a lot of other stuff going on. Like there's a lot of I'm doing a lot of conversing with something beyond what I was talking about. And that's something that's something words don't work with, right? This is something, if anything, me talking about music is probably closer to any kind of meaning that I can get. So to share. So the relationship with the works communicates to you beyond the words, almost like telepathy or something, telepathic or whatever, you know, something like that. So that's what I'm aiming for.
That's great. Bob asked what you're doing in your residency, and I'll just
waiting for you to
note
come by and studio visit. That's what I'm doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's at the Massachusetts College of Liberal Arts, MCLA.
Right. I got a project going. I'm not gonna give it away, right? But I can tell you that it involves it's a community-based project and a studio-based project, and it involves education systems, and it also involves unfound histories that are in this in Berkshire. That's what I can tell you publicly.
That's great. And do you know when your exhibition from this residency will be? Do they have?
It's in the fall.
In the fall. Okay, great. We'll let all the students who are here at least know, and we'll make sure the word gets out about that. That'll be great because it's not far. Let's see, Daniela, you have a question. No, everyone's shy tonight. Okay, I'll ask your question, Daniela. What made you want to pursue art?
That's a good question. That's a really good question. I don't know. To me, it's like I said earlier. I don't know if you was here, Daniela, but what I said was I come from a very, very poor neighborhood in Houston, and there were, you know, until I didn't even know, I don't even know, like we did music. I remember us doing a lot of music stuff, but not like visual arts like that. But I didn't know about galleries and museums and all that, you know, all of that stuff. I didn't have a language for it. I didn't know it existed. All I know, I was doing things like as a kid, you know, I read a lot of comics books too, and so I looked at a lot of cartoons. So I remember, you know, saving my cereal boxes. And if you're familiar with Spider-Man, you know he like floats through the city on spider webs. And so to me, the cereal boxes look like buildings. So I would cut, a lot of rectangles to make the cereal boxes look like the buildings, and the rectangles look like the windows. And then I would get my little Spider-Man doll thing, and then I would get some crazy glue, which is like really stringy, and I would just glue through the boxes, and it would look like Spider-Man was going through all of the cereal boxes. So I kind of was into like world building, right? And I'm an only child. So to me, I was doing all of this stuff, plus drawing, I didn't pursue art, it pursued me. I was there. It was the thing. It was what it is. I can't even explain, like, there was no other direction I could go. The only other direction I could go was to be a drummer. And I do drumming like as part of the performance or making sounds now. So, I mean, it's just part of my life, which is why, like I said, I know it's an old argument, but I'm so much into the art is life thing, which is why it is. So I can't say that I pursued it. I can only say it pursued me, and I'm just in it, and I'm just living. This is what I'm doing. That's all I can do.
That's great, and it shows in the work. We have several questions around kind of the role of music and sound in your work, kind of what inspires it, and then when did you start kind of finding and using sound in your work?
Well, I found it. I was going back to kid. I was beating on books and pots, and that's too loud. So mom bought me a drum set. So that's how that started. In terms of me changing directions, I was going to the ninth grade high school, and I had a best friend who died in a car accident. But in middle school, every morning, and we would be late all the time, but every morning his house was closer to the school, so I would go from my house to his house. Then we would both walk to school, and he had a drum set, and we would always play whatever. We would just play before we go to school. It was like a ritual. So we go to high school, and we're both going to be in the band. Well, my problem was I thought I knew more than what I really knew, right? And so I thought I could tell the band director how things was going because I was self-taught. But I wasn't really like great, but at that time I was better than a lot of them, And so I got into this argument with the band director, and she kicked me out of class and had me go down. I had to walk down the hall, like the movies where this one person walking down this long hallway. That was me. So I went to the principal office, and they told me I couldn't go back because I was cursing and all that stuff. And at the time, I don't curse now, but then I was cursing the teacher out. And so then they was like, well, what else can you do? Was the question. I said, well, I can draw. And then that's when I got into art class. And that's how it happened. So that's how the music kind of changed into not being focused on like being in a band, but it kind of extracted itself from that situation. And everything after that became about sound or musicality versus like making a song. And then in college, undergrad, which I would, I went to TSU, but I dropped out a few times. I dropped out many times, back in and out, in and out. And during those times of dropping out, I got into hip hop, and I was always a dancer. So I started dancing for different rap groups and going to clubs and dance battles. And that kind of, that deepened my understanding of musicality from like body movements and stuff like that. So then that was another component of it formulating into my practice. And once, then later on, I just started putting music, sound into my works. And then now I also try to put music into my work that can be read, but not in the sense of music notes, but in the sense of an abstraction, like visually. So my thing is, how can you see sound through the use of abstraction or the use of objects? And that's how it is. So I don't know, it may change to something else.
That's great. Only time for a couple more, but Belinda asks, I love your connection to the community. Do you see the inspiration created by your giving nature? Did you have a singular person who inspired you in Houston?
My grandfather. Yeah, it's my grandfather. But I mean, Houston, I want to generalize the whole city, but many of the people that I deal with in terms of art, they have some sense of community, some kind of sense of community, if they're not full-blown community social practice artists. There's some sense of community in it, some kind of consideration to your environment. So, but yeah, my grandfather.
That's wonderful. I have to ask, just because we have so many students here, do you have advice for students, art students, early in their careers?
Yeah, don't give up. Don't stop. Take risk. Challenge yourself, and don't be like me when I was in high school and think you know everything. Even if you do know everything, there's something else you can know. You know, there's something else you can know, and try to understand how important that you are as an artist and a student, even if you don't hear it from other people. So you may not get congratulated on everything you do, or everything you do may not be great. And I mean, literally may be bad stuff, but doing all the bad things help you get to the better stuff. And if you don't work through the bad things, you'll never get to the good stuff. You'll never get there. You need to make mistakes. You need to take risks, and you need to take breaks. And I guess the last thing is support your cohort and your other artists, fellowship with other artists, or your art community. I mean, I don't know how you want to use the term for it, but whoever else is making or doing what you're doing, or something similar, or even if they're not doing what you're doing, and they may be mathematicians or writing books or whatever. Support them, and they'll support you, and you may be able to pull something out of something quicker from a mathematician than another artist. So your information is ongoing. Your information is everywhere, and your education is ongoing, even when you sleep. That's what I gotta say.
That's great. And what a nice note to end on. Thank you, Nathaniel. This is really wonderful. And everyone, his website is in the chat, and I encourage you all to go, and we'll let you know about his show, which is just over in North Adams in the fall. And we wish you the best of luck in your residency while you're here. And thank you for joining us tonight. I'm sorry we couldn't do it in person, but I'm so glad we got to spend so much time with you and your work, and see how you make connections among all the stuff that inspires you and your incredible practice. So thank you very much. And if everyone can unmute and give Nathaniel a big round of applause. I really appreciate you doing a Zoom. And we've gotten wonderful comments in the chat. Thanks. So please don't leave without seeing those. But thank you, everyone. You heard it here. Nathaniel said it. Go see artist lectures. They are so good for you. And enjoy your evening, everyone. And please, if you haven't seen the show, come on Saturday, 11 to 5. We are open. And thank you again.
Been done that.
All right. Bye.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Thank
Have a
you.
good night.
Stay warm.